Yeah, actually in connection to what Hussein said about knowledge and seeking it and going into the depth of things, one of the things you say about Sufism is that it's not something you can just study from books. There is also like a proverb among Sufis, I don't know if it's common Arabic proverb or if it's only among Sufis, but you say al-ilmu laysa fi sutur bal fi sudur. But knowledge is not in the lines of books, it's in the hearts of people. So one of the main principles of Sufism and spiritual knowledge in general is that you have to actually receive it from another person. You can't just study it because words can only tell you so much and books can only go so much into deep. When you talk about religion and about experience and spirituality, there's another dimension that you have to kind of connect to another person. And I hope that this opportunity will be an opportunity to share some of these insights of a very old tradition. Sufism, Tasawwuf as it's called in Arabic, is a very old spiritual tradition. Just like the other world religions have profound spiritual traditions, so in Islam you have the tradition of Sufism, which it goes back more than 1,000 years, and it has filled libraries and lives of people who have traveled this way and lived with this knowledge and this spirituality in their lives. When I was invited to speak here, I was very delighted, of course, to be invited, but then I began wondering what kind of audience it would be. And I came to the conclusion that it would probably be very mixed, and I think I was right about that. So how do you talk to a mixed audience? Some of you may know something about Sufism in advance. Some of you know about Islamic terminology and words, and others, maybe it's completely new. Also, usually I'm used to talking in two main settings. One is at the university, where I teach Islamic studies or religious studies to people who are interested in sociology and history and economy and politics and all this. And then sometimes I teach at the mosque for people who are religious and they want to benefit from religious knowledge. And I think this audience is neither of these actually. It is a mixture of people who have some kind of relation either to the Syrian Danish Institute or who have heard something about Sufism, maybe somebody who knows a lot. So I've tried to prepare this speech to hit this audience. And of course it's impossible to hit all of you, but I'll do my best. So I asked myself the question, why would people attend a lecture on Sufism? And I came to the conclusion that people probably attend because they have some kind of personal interest in spirituality or in seeking knowledge about life and the meaning of life. Not so much about history perhaps, not so much about politics or sociology as I would usually teach at the university. So what I've tried is to give you an introduction to Sufi life, or to Sufi mentality, Sufi religiosity, and to kind of invite you to be voyeurs, to invite you to see this from the outside, or if you're already practicing or living with some kind of Sufism, to be inspired or brought to remember something that you already know. So any gathering that shares this kind of knowledge about Sufism should actually begin by making a prayer for the people here and the people attending. So I'll do this actually, and I hope you won't feel, for those who've never talked about Sufism, won't feel odd about this. But usually we read Al-Fatiha, which is the first surah of the Quran. So I say Al-Fatiha إلى حضرة رسول الله وإلى آله وصحبه وسلم بأن الله ينفعنا بأسرارهم وأنوارهم وعلومهم. So this is kind of a short prayer for the Prophet and for all those who followed this path, like going thousands of years back, who have tried to make the best of their lives on this path, that we will benefit from their knowledge and their secrets, their spiritual insights in this gathering. So we read Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanirrahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim. Ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim wa lad-dallin. This surah.
آمين كملها آمين
آمين.
يا
أنتم كملوا. So this surah, it's not just to make a prayer for the gathering. It's actually the first beginning of the Quran is a prayer. And it's the same prayer that Muslims perform in all their prayers, at least 2 or 3 or 4 times in each prayer. So these verses that I just recited is arguably the most recited verses ever. I mean, it's the same prayer that all Muslims pray every time, 5 times a day. And what I wanted to make about this, I wanted to make a point about this, because Sufism is very much about having a personal relationship with God or with Allah or with your Creator. So in starting with this prayer, we actually begin from the very core of Sufism, which is man standing in front of Allah or in front of God and wanting to connect, wanting to be unified, wanting to be one and really being in love with God. So the reason I think the Quran starts with this prayer is actually because this is what we need at the basis of everything else. We need to remember God, and we need to ask God for all the help in all our situations. So when we say this prayer, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. So we say to God, you do we worship and you do we ask for help. So this is actually the ideal, it sums up the life of the Sufi. Iyaka na'budu, you do we serve in all our actions, in all our moments, in all our ambitions and intentions. We wish to serve you, we wish to be with you, God. And in all our moments, in all our states, we seek your guidance, we seek protection against all evil for you. So, this is actually the beginning of probably a lot of religion and a lot of religious lives, but it is certainly the beginning of Sufism or Tasawwuf. So, I want to thank the arrangers one more time to give us this opportunity to dig into this tradition. And I've taught this course or courses on Sufism lasting for a whole semester, like several hours every week, lots of readings, and still only getting a sense of scratching the surface of a tradition. So what we can reach today is even less than this. We can get a glimpse or maybe a taste of what this means or what it's like to live this Sufi life. So what I want you to remember when we read this is that this is an old tradition. There are libraries filled with books on this topic. Most of these books have never been translated into a Western language. As of today, maybe 10 or 15% of all manuscripts, books existing in Arabic, Persian, Bengali or Malay or whatever Turkish Islamic languages, only very few of them have made the translation process into English or French or even less into Danish. So before us, there is a long range of people who have tried, who have struggled, who have sought life on this path. And now we're sitting here and trying to get a glimpse of what they've tried. So the beginning of Sufism, and what the Sufis would say is that every human heart has a longing. Every human heart has a longing for God. And sometimes this longing is hidden. We're not even aware of it. But in our hearts there is like a small seed just waiting to grow up to be a tree. So we have a longing not just for Allah, but also for self-cultivation, for changing ourselves, to become better, to become more sublime. And not only do we have this desire, the Sufis also believe that God has a desire for us to come. So one of the famous poets of Sufism, you probably know Rumi, he has a saying that says, "What you seek is seeking you." So the meaning is, of course, that maybe I have this desire to reach beyond the confines of this life, but beyond the confines of this life, there is somebody seeking me first. So God is already seeking into our hearts. And God is already there, actually. So Sufism is very simple in a way. Because God is already there. He's with us in every moment, movement, every thought. God is already there. Usually, or often, this seed that is planted in our hearts, it will grow in times of trial, when we're challenged, when we face difficulties in life. And I have a funny story about this actually, because one day I went to the morning prayer at the mosque. And it was, I think, a Saturday morning. And there was a guy, I noticed him right when I walked across the street to enter the mosque. A guy who was really drunk, like not just ecstatic drunk, but really physically beer drunk. And he'd come out of the city, and it was 4 or 5 in the morning. And he was kind of interested in what was going on, or what was going to go on in the mosque. So when I walked towards the mosque, he was a Danish, like myself, ethnic Dane. So he jumped on me, not in a violent way, but you know how sometimes very drunk people can be, you know, you feel that they want to hug you, even if you don't know them. And he wanted to go in, but he was kind of confused about everything, and there was confusion at the door, but anyway, I got into the mosque, and then I waited for 5 minutes, just sitting and waiting with the other people. And then I noticed he'd actually gone in. And he was sitting, trying to blend in, but it was obvious actually that he was falling to each side, and he was really, really drunk. But anyway, he stood up and he prayed with us. And you know, in the Islamic prayer, you put your head to the ground, which is like a very difficult practice if you're drunk, actually. So he had difficulties getting up, and when the prayer was finalized, lots of people had noticed that he was actually drunk, and he wasn't really supposed to be here. But everybody took it nicely, and we talked to him, and especially I sat and talked to him afterwards as the sun got up. It was the morning prayer. And it turned out he had a very special story why he was there. He told me that some months ago, he had a newborn daughter, and he was playing with her, so holding her over his head like this, and he dropped her by accident. So he dropped her on the side of the bed or something, and she just completely blacked out. So he actually thought that she was dead, and he, for several hours, they took him to the hospital, and they took her to kind of see if she could be put back to life. And all this process, you can imagine just his adrenaline and all his life just, have I killed my daughter? What's going on in this? It's like completely out of the extraordinary of life. Finally, the doctors managed to get her back to life, and she didn't suffer any real injury. But afterwards, he was stuck with a feeling that he had never witnessed before, because he wanted to give thanks for this survival, that she survived this fall. But he had never been religious. Actually, it turned out, I didn't know him there, but he's actually a very prominent academic in philosophy. And but he had never seen this perspective. He had never felt this urge or this longing to communicate with something bigger than himself. So we sat and we talked all morning, and it kind of opened up a new perspective for him to see this, and he'd been looking for a place to go, and this is why he ended up at the mosque. So usually, or often, it's when our lives are disrupted like this that we feel this seed moving in our hearts, that we feel that we want to reach out for God. And of course, I'm humbled to be here because I know some of you have refugee backgrounds, and this is exactly the kind of disruption of life that is so radical and so overwhelming that common Danes, including myself, can't even imagine what you've been going through. Losing family, losing your home, and all this. But even with this is often where religion and Sufism begins. Sufism, in this context, is a way of bringing God, this extraordinary experience, into the center of your life. So not just having it when you're going through these extreme situations, but having it at all times. Having this connection, this relationship with God at all times. And now, I know the program said that I was going to speak a lot about Sufism in Syria, but I just talked to Zaina now, and this is actually not what I've prepared to speak about Sufism in Syria a lot. I wanted to speak about Sufism in general, because Sufism is really not a national phenomenon. Sufism has always been transnational. It has always been about orders and brotherhoods and teachings that transcend borders, areas, languages, gender, even to some extent religions. You have people in Egypt, even today in India, you have Hindus and Christians coming to Sufi gatherings, because there's something about Sufism that transcends even religious affiliation. Sufism, as I said, is not just in Syria, it's across the world, and it has been for at least 1,000 years, part of all countries, all areas of the Islamic world. And still there's like this Arabic or Syrian perspective, because I spent many years in Syria myself, and Syria is an important country for Sufism as well. I don't know if any of you know of Ibn Arabi. He's called the Sheikh al-Akbar, the biggest sheikh, the biggest spiritual teacher of them all. And he's actually buried in Damascus. So Syria has been a center for Sufism in the classical period. He's from the 12th century. At the same time, Syria is also the home, Damascus even is the home of Ibn Taymiyyah. Maybe you've not heard about Ibn Taymiyyah, but Ibn Taymiyyah, he's like the founding father of Salafism. Okay? So Syria has the graves of the founder, or one of the biggest sheikhs of Sufism and Salafism in the same city. So this makes Syria and Damascus a very, very special place. And actually, Ibn Taymiyyah, he was also a Sufi. This is what very few people know, that he was actually a member of the Sufi order. So there is this perspective from Syria anyway, because when I was in Syria, I came to Syria for the first time in 2002, and I stayed in Damascus, and I had a friend he was a member of a Sufi order. He was my Arabic teacher, I think maybe 15 years older than me. And he took me to a gathering, the first Sufi gathering I was ever in. And I remember we were at the Souq al-Khayatin. Maybe some of the Syrians here, they know this. It's an area of the old city where you have all the sewers. And in this part of the old city, there is a place, there's a mosque called Nuruddin al-Shahid. A special mosque where my friend, he took me. So I got into this mosque and there were just people sitting silently, some reading, some just chatting. But after a while, everybody got up. 200 people. And they started making this kind of chanting or like rhythmic singing almost, just going Allah, Allah, Allah. And everybody holding hands. And it got more and more ecstatic. It got more and more intense. And after a while, people started moving and jumping, and it got really, really like wild actually. For me at this point, it was the first gathering I was ever in. Even I'd read about Sufism, but I'd never been in this kind of gathering. But it was very easy to participate actually. It was easy to fall in, because it was so simple. It was just a direct way, just direct remembrance and communication with God. And later I learned that this ritual is part of the special kind of Sufism. It's called the Hadra. And it means actually that you bring the presence of God in your gathering. This is what you do by chanting and remembering God together. So after a while I saw like really grown men with big beards and strong men just crying like babies. And it was such an amazing experience for me, and such a direct experience actually. It was immediately easy to go into. And then everything calmed down a bit. And there was a guy brought in a wheelchair, and it turned out he was the sheikh, he was the guru of the gathering. And he looked like he was 1,000 years old. I later learned that he was only 91. But there was just something about this guy, his eyes, he looked like he'd seen the beginning of the world and he knew everything. And he wasn't just, he was very humble, like really thin, almost meager man, an old man. But the way everybody venerated him and everything like turned around him in this gathering, it was really, really amazing, and it had a big influence on me. So anyway, later on I learned that this sheikh was a Sufi sheikh, and he died a year after actually. He's called Abdurrahman al-Shawuli. Maybe some people from Syria or from Damascus know this name.
I heard this in Libya, exactly what you said, where we say Allah Hay, Allah Hay, Allah Hay. But then they do it so much that the water comes out from their mouth. I saw that in Libya, in Tripoli.
It's possible.
Is it the one similar what you are saying?
It could be, yeah. They have this brotherhood. Actually, Al-Shaghuri, this sheikh, his sheikh was from Algeria. So it's present in North Africa as well. So I asked my friend afterwards, how do you become like this? What do you have to do to be as old as time itself, or look as old as time itself? And he said that you have to do lots of dhikr. Dhikr means remembering God. And it's the key practice of Sufism, is remembering God. Remembering God by His names, His attributes, and thinking about God. And you have to be patient, and you have to communicate in all moments with God, in your heart. Not necessarily on your lips and talking, but be aware inside yourself and practice this remembrance and this presence. And over the years, if you go on with this, you will give yourself over. And you will come into a state of withness. So your life is not just you living your own life, and your mind is not just you having your own mind. There is a presence or a withness. I know this is not a real word, but it's, maybe you could say in Arabic, ma'iyya. So you have this, it's always shared with God. So, if we go to the word Sufism, Sufism of course is a Western word. And you have this ism which indicates that this is some kind of ideology or Sufism or system of teachings, like you have communism or socialism or Buddhism. You use this ism to indicate that this is kind of a system or an ideology. But this is kind of misleading, because in Arabic you don't actually have this word Sufism. You have tasawwuf. And tasawwuf indicates a process. It's the type 5 word for those who are into Arabic grammar. Like indicating a movement or something, a process that's going on. And this is actually more close to what tasawwuf is, or Sufism is. It's a process of moving closer to God. It's a process of purifying yourself. And it goes on and on and on through life. Also, you have the word Sufi. Like a person who does this is a Sufi. And it's not actually certain where this word comes from or why these people are called Sufis. But some say it's because the first people who were Sufis, they wore wool. So they wore this cloth made of wool, which is of course coarse on the body. It's not nice to wear wool on your skin because it scratches and you sweat and it's really uncomfortable. But this was kind of the early Sufis, or at least some paths of the early Sufism. You had this ideal of making things difficult for yourself. So they were called Sufis, some of them. Also, some people say that it comes from safa, which means purity, or purifying yourself. Now, usually people will think, but what has this got to do with Islam? It's not a word that's mentioned in the Quran. It's not a word that's even used in the Hadith and all this. And maybe some of you know Ibn Khaldun. He's a very famous Andalusian scholar, and he's generally said to be the founder of modern sociology and history, actually, because when the French and British scholars of the 18th century read his works, they founded modern sociology and history and all this as we have disciplines today. But Ibn Khaldun was also a scholar of Islam, and he mentions that tasawwuf or Sufism was the norm among the early Muslims. So this was the religiosity of the early generations of Muslims. In time, people got preoccupied with silk dresses and gold and big palaces and money and power, also among the Muslims. So the people who stayed on the path of poverty and simple life and austerity got this special name, and they were called Sufis. So the point is that Sufism is not something else than Islam. It's more like an aspect of it that deals with the inward. It deals with personal religiosity, it deals with morality and personal experience and lived experience of being with God. Usually Sufism is construed as a path. So it's a path you walk. In Arabic it's called tariqa. Like literally it means that you walk a path. And usually we say that there are different paths, but they all lead to the same reality. They all lead to God and being with God. Also, there are different practices, but they have the same goal. These paths, or these tariqas, they have the goal of cultivating your person, your inner, your heart. So cultivating and purifying your morality and your mind, actually. Nowadays we talk a lot about cognitive psychology, changing the way you think. this is very much in line with what Sufism is. It's changing how you think, changing how you see things, changing how you experience life and yourself. It being a path also means that the way you see things and experience things at the beginning of the path is very different from when you're further along the path. So a person who starts going into Sufism has a very different perspective than the person who's been there for 20 years, or 10 years, or 30 years. And the concepts and the words that you use to think about this reality changes as well as you change, because every person has a personal, private, subjective experience. So Sufism is like the spirituality of Islam. It's called, some people call it the fiqh al-batin. It is the rules and the teachings of what goes on inside. So you have the physical world, and you have the physical teachings that you should pray like this, you should fast in Ramadan. This is called fiqh in Arabic, the teachings of Islam, the practical teachings. This is the fiqh al-batin, it's the teachings of the inward, what's going on inside.
Have you heard this word before? التكرار يعلم الحمار. Have you heard this before?
No, thanks
يا
for
أخي
saying
أنت عم تقولنا نفس الكلمة. الله واحد لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
It's very
هيك
simple.
غيتي. هيك غيتي.
It's very simple, yeah.
Yeah. ودو ديك قلت.
You can say that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Thanks. Not for calling me Hamar. So, it's when you have tasawwuf, you talk about tazkiyat al-nafs. You talk about purifying the self. And you have two very important aspects of this process. One is called takhliya, and one is called tahliya. They sound familiar. Takhliya means ridding oneself of all those traits of personality that are blameworthy. And tahliya means the opposite. It means gaining and getting those traits of character that are praiseworthy, that are good, like good moral traits. Takhliya are all the things that will ruin your heart. So in Sufism, the Sufis believe that all bad actions, all bad deeds will remain on the heart. It will put a black spot on the heart. And eventually it will veil the heart from seeing reality. Takhliya means removing those veils, or removing those spots that come from being in this way. The number of things that are seen as blameworthy are many, but one of the main things is kibr, it's arrogance. So feeling arrogant towards other people, feeling that you're better than others, or despising them, is one of the things that the Sufi masters will teach you. You have to get rid of this. And there's a reason for this, because not only is kibr or arrogance is like the main sin of Satan in the Quran. It's the one thing that Satan does. He wants to turn away. He won't obey, or he won't follow the teachings of God. So arrogance is like the main sin. Thinking lowly of others, or thinking badly about others, and wanting to be, in a higher position than everybody else, and thinking oneself better. One of the signs of this, of course, is that you strive for fame or for position. You want people to praise you. You want people to put you on a pedestal. This is called kibr. And one of the traditions of the Prophet is that he says, no one who has even the atom's weight of kibr, or of arrogance, will come into paradise. So just having a small element of this is harmful for the heart. It's enough for the heart to be in a state of illness. Sufism works with removing these illnesses, as it's called, from the heart. Another thing is what you call in Arabic riya, or like pretending that you're better than you're not. This is usually it's tied to the religious life. So you go to the prayer and you give money in charity, but you do it not because you want to approach God or to please God. You do it because you want other people to point you out as somebody who's very, very holy or very, like a very magnificent person. This is called riya. You do it to be seen. And like Kbh, this is something that's in your heart. It is something that you need to get out of your heart as a part of this purification. When we talk about this, we see that this is something that's very common. Everybody has these traits. We're envious of each other. We're arrogant towards each other. We have, everybody, all of us in different degrees, have these challenges of the heart, these illnesses of the heart, as the Sufis would say. Even like the biggest masters of this tradition recognize that they themselves have these things. So you have a person like Al-Ghazali, maybe you've know about him. He's one of the most famous scholars of Islam. And he was like a leading teacher of the science, of the Islamic sciences, like really talking to thousands of people in Baghdad, and people coming for advice. But one day he discovered that he enjoyed this too much. He enjoyed this position, this prestige, this people calling him the biggest scholar. He found in his own heart that he was enjoying this too much, and that he wasn't really sincere in what he was doing. He wasn't doing it for God, he was doing it for the prestige of people. And the story goes that Al-Ghazali, he was actually turned mute. He couldn't speak. So all these people came to him, and he was unable to answer. And he knew why, but nobody else knew why. He knew in his heart that it was because he had this illness. So what did he do? After months of reflection, he decided to leave everything. So he left his family, he left his job, he left his position as the main speaker, and he just went into austerity. Nobody knew where he was, and he spent years like this. And this is very telling about what some of the big masters of Sufism have done, or how they've tried to challenge themselves, and how they've tried to be sincere in this path. When he came back, Al-Ghazali, he wrote a book, a very famous book called Ihya Ulum al-Din, Revivification of the Religious Sciences. So what he said, that all this knowledge, all these books that we have in our libraries, it's no good at all. It's no good at all if your heart is impure. If you're doing it for the prestige of it, it's just dead sciences. It's dead practices, the prayer, the fasting, it has no benefit. So he wanted to get behind it and beneath it and say, what is the spirit of this? What is it that we need from this? And what he came up with was actually very simple. You need to have this heart that is oriented always towards what's beyond, always oriented towards God. Otherwise, all these practices and knowledge, it loses its purpose. So just like you have these ruinous dispositions, these illnesses of the heart, where I've mentioned only two, there are many others like envy and being harsh. You know, some people are very harsh. We see it now with the Islamic State, for instance. Among the Sufis, this is considered as an illness of the heart that you have to get out of your heart. So one process is getting rid of these illnesses. The other thing, as I mentioned, is beautifying the heart. It's tahliya, it's making the heart more beautiful, or the psyche or the psychology of the person more beautiful. So I mentioned before that Sufism is construed as a path, it's a tariqah, it's a way you march. And along this tariqah, you have different stations, like stations where you kind of stop in a way, or you reach this stage. For the Sufis, it always starts with what you call tawbah in Arabic, like repentance. You realize that you have to change, that you're not in the right place in your life, that something is not as it's supposed to be, and you want to change. So you start off with this desire to change the ways you usually live your life. And then when you try to do this, you realize that this is actually very difficult. Anybody who has tried to change themselves, tried to change their inner emotions and feelings, they realize that it's really, really difficult. Even small things, the habits we have, maybe you're able to change it for a month or 2 months or half a year, but then it comes back in a different disguise. And you think of, especially I used to think before I had children, that I was kind of okay. I was a patient guy, I didn't get angry with people. But then you get children, you reach another stage of your life and you realize that you don't have anything. Because once they wake up in the middle of the night, you're not patient at all. And you get mad at them and you shout at them. So the stages of life always have these, this need to return to the sources of all this and look at yourself from a new perspective. But anyway, usually the Sufi path in all the different traditions begins with tawbah, so seeking forgiveness or wanting to change. You have this in Arabic, you say astaghfirullah. Like it's almost like a part of natural language in many Arabic countries. And people say it like astaghfirullah, just like, oh my God, it's almost like, sometimes it's like a curse actually. But it actually means to seek this forgiveness. Then the other dispositions of the heart, there are many dispositions that you have to cultivate as part of this beautification process. Is a hope. Because in life we see ourselves making so many mistakes. We see ourselves making so many wrong things, and we see ourselves repeating things that we really dislike. We get mad for the same reasons, we get stupid for the same reasons, and sometimes it feels like we're just moving around in circles. But a very important point about Sufism is to keep a hope that even though we're such losers, basically, God can still, we still have a hope that God can forgive us and bring us closer anyway. Leading on from this hope is sabr. Sabr is like a key foundation of the Sufi path as well, being patient. Because when we go through life, we will be challenged immensely. And once we feel stable, once we feel that we've kind of got things under control, our foundations will be shaken again. This is how life is. This is how, from the Sufi perspective, this is how God keeps trying us, keep pushing us, and keeps wanting us to move further. So a very important foundation is this sabr, this patience. Patience means keeping up the path, not losing it and forgetting it, keeping up the practices. When people humiliate you, when people are really, really harsh to you, when everything goes the opposite of how you planned it, to not lose hope and not get angry with God. This is one of the main, I think, perhaps more today, one of the main illnesses of people's heart today is this: why is this happening? There's so much misery, not just in the world but also in my life. Why don't I get what I want? But this is part of the old psychology of Sufism. This is how life is. You have to remain steadfast, you have to remain trusting and patient with these afflictions and these trials. This leads to another key element, which is shukr. It's kind of like gratitude or thankfulness in life. Knowing that every good thing you have is from God. Every breath you have and every heartbeat and every meal you have is from God. So you have this basic state of thankfulness in your life and in your heart. And just before I mentioned astaghfirullah, seeking God's forgiveness as something very common in Arabic. The same you have in Arabic, people say alhamdulillah. It's very, very common and you hear it in all conversations. Also alhamdulillah, which means all praise or all thanks is to God. It's the first word of the Quran. This is how the Quran begins. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So Sufism has this thankfulness very much at the core, recognizing and taking this thankfulness and putting it at the center of your life. Actually, when you talk about Sufism, you have two main paths. One is called the Eastern path, and the other is more like North Africa and Andalusia. And one path is the path of jihad and nafs. It's where you struggle with yourself. You don't sleep a lot, you don't eat a lot, you don't speak a lot, you isolate yourself, you're really hard on yourself to get rid of all these illnesses. So you force yourself in a way. Like you know from other traditions as well. From Hinduism and the Christian monks and the Buddhists. The other way is tariqat al-shukr. It's the path of gratitude, where you're not trying so hard to punish or be hard on yourself. Instead, you turn everything into thankfulness. So one of the Sufis, he has a very simple saying. He says, drink cold water. What does it mean, drink cold water? The Sufis that are very rough on themselves, they will say, no, I will only drink this humid water, and then just take it because I don't want to enjoy it. But the tariqat, the shukr, the way of thankfulness, he will say, drink it cold because then you will feel happy about it. And it will be easier to be grateful. And this is not just about water, it's about life in general. So take the things that make you happy because it will make you more grateful. So tahliya, this purification of the self, is getting those things into your mentality and your cognitive systems that is praiseworthy, the good moral traits and the good dispositions. One of these things is to have a kind of detachment from the world. So I remember when I was doing my field work in Malaysia, I met an old lady, like really simple, smiling and full of light, and she said, you know, Sufism is very simple. You take the world out of your heart and into your hand. So instead of longing and desiring the world, you turn the world into something you use to reach God instead. And it sounds simple, of course, it always sounds simple. But getting all this, you get mad about things that you don't have, you always want more. You want more money, a better job, more position. Sufism says the other way, you have to be satisfied with what you get. Because when you're satisfied, you have everything you need. And if you're not satisfied, even if you have everything, you don't have anything. So this detachment from material things is key in Sufism as well. Actually, I can see now that I'm over time. So I'm just going to round it off a bit with the practical dimensions of Sufism. As I mentioned before, you had dhikr, this remembrance of God is like the key practice of Sufism. And how do people do this? They do it by remembering often Allah's names. Some of you may know that in the Islamic tradition, God has 99 names, and He has the most beautiful names. So in Sufism you call upon God by these names: Al-Latif, the very subtle, kind one, or the Karim, Al-Karim, the very generous one, or the Ar-Rahman, the merciful one. And remembering these aspects or these names of God is one of the main practices. Also, in Sufism, it's important that you have, for instance, the 5 prayers. They are at special times and they're a specific number and it's done in a specific way. The Sufis, it's important that all your life, all your moments, is potentially a kind of service to God. So dhikr is something you do when you talk and when you walk and when you lie down and when you stand up. It's in all moments. Also, one of the things that the Sufis emphasize is tahajjud. It's using the night when it's dark and quiet to be with God. Many of Rumi's poems is about seeking this solitude with his lover, being alone with his lover, being in the night, and he often says about drinking the wine, like getting the sweetness of being with his lover. So this is central, the night and being alone with God when other people are sleeping. And then the concept of ithar is central as well in Sufism. Ithar means putting other people before yourself. So it's preferring others to yourself. It's the opposite of egoism. So always paying attention to how other people want, what they want and what they need. And of course, the image of ithar, of doing this, is the mother, because the mother is always thinking about her child first. Even physically, when the child is in the womb, the body will feed the child before it feeds the mother. So she's like a manifestation of this ithar. So Sufism in practice is very much about having this preference and this interest in other people. And another key concept is khidmah, is doing service to others. Throughout history, the Sufi brotherhoods or the Sufi orders have had this practice of doing service to people around them. Very much like you see the monks serving people, serving them food, protecting the poor, taking in orphans and all this, caring for the handicapped people. This is key in the Sufi path as well. I remember when I was doing my fieldwork in Yemen, there was one of the sheikhs who was teaching, and everybody agreed that he was really an amazing person, and you just wanted to listen to what he had to say. And one day, one of the persons said, "How did you get like this? I mean, how did you get this light in your heart?" And he said, "One thing is praying at night, and the other thing is when I go out of my house, I always make an intention that all the people that I will meet on my way, I will try to help them. I will try to give them what they need and what they want." So this was his path actually, just doing khidmah and serving people. And to close off, now that I've 15 minutes over time, I will mention another thing that from my fieldwork in Singapore. The community that I was in Singapore was a very khidmah, very service-oriented community. They were always looking for opportunities to serve the disabled children and arranging parties for disabled kids and old people, and so very focused on this. And I remember one day the sheikh said that when somebody comes to you for help, it's like God opening a door for you. He's inviting you in. So you should always enter by that door. You should always try to help the people when they ask you, and never slam the door in God's face. So this was his principle of khidmah, is that it's an opportunity you get actually. So people ask you for help, but it's actually you getting a gift if you want to receive it. That's all. Thanks for listening.